Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 13 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. Gavin, we're at lucky number 13. How does that make you feel?
Good. I love 13. It was my number in soccer in high school. I love it.
It was you know what? Of course it is. It was my number in baseball
Ooh, wow.
when I played.
Twins.
How about it was always, I always ended up liking it because people were always, 13 was the unlucky number. Except for I heard somebody say at one time that except for all the weirdos out there, 13 was their lucky number. It was kind of the opposite, which I always really took to heart. So I am very happy about episode number 13 here, and I think this is going to be a fun episode. Before we get quite into that, we've got to make sure we do this week in science. So, Gavin, what was going on this week? I'm going to guess and say 2015.
Let's see. So, no. I had to think so. I had not yet decided exactly what one we were going to do. Because there was one that's
Not one from 2015.
No. There was one that was more related, but I think we should do this one anyway, just out of respect. So this is
Okay.
So this is another twofer. So this is
Oh boy.
March 13th and 14th. So this coming Saturday and Sunday. Let's see. So March 13th, 2019, supermassive black holes detected in early universe. That's not the one out of respect, but we'll just get this one out of the way.
Okay.
Astronomers from Princeton University, utilizing the Subaru telescope. I didn't know telescopes could have product placement, but okay.
Subaru. Okay, yeah.
Discovered the presence of 83 quasars powered by supermassive black holes in what is known as the early universe, or the area of space nearest to where the Big Bang occurred. Each of these black holes is millions or billions times larger than our sun.
I have lots of questions, especially when they say like the near the location of the Big Bang, but I'm just gonna let that roll.
Yeah, I don't know either, but we're just gonna
Right,
let it go.
right. My understanding of the Big Bang would lead that to be a meaningless statement, but whatever. Anyways, what's the out of respect? What's the let's move on to the next one.
March 14th, 2018. Renowned
Okay.
scientist Stephen Hawking dies.
Oh,
So,
pour one out.
yep.
I remember I had a astronomy professor in college who, like, while I was taking his class, he like went out and met up with Stephen Hawking. The dude's
Oh,
last
that's
name
so
was
cool.
Watson, which like was which was a great last name for the class. And there was a picture taken with him, and it was really cool. And so pour one out for Stephen Hawking. That was I actually remember when that happened. It
I
was
was
there's not too many
so sad.
scientists, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of how many scientists who when they die, it becomes headline news. And for all the important work scientists do, they tend not to make the front pages of the news.
Yeah, let me just look really quickly and see when Carl Sagan died.
Oh, Carl
Because I'm trying to
Sagan, that was
remember if I was alive when he died or not.
that's a
I
good
mean,
question.
technically, yes, I was 6 months old.
Oh,
I don't.
which means I was about a year old.
Yeah, I don't remember that one. Anyway, so yeah, March 14th, 2018. Let's see. On March 14th, 2018, Stephen Hawking died at age 76. The author of A Brief History of Time and honored physicist with focus on black holes and relativity, Hawking spent his life working to expand human understanding of the world. Hawking's
That's understatement of the
oh
century.
god, I know, right? Hawking's contributions to science can never be properly measured. He will be remembered as one of the era's most amazing minds. Absolutely. So, again,
Without a doubt.
yeah, like I'm trying to think because like the only other scientist that I can think of, and this is me like even as a paleontologist, I can't think of somebody like in the field of like geology, honestly, that like when they die, it'll just be like massive like that. I
Hmm.
can't really think of anybody. Um, the only person that I could think of that would have been even like sort of recent would be Wegener, the guy who sort of first came up with the idea of plate tectonics. But I'm pretty sure he's been dead since like the 80s. But like that was the last like incredibly major groundbreaking thing in geology. Maybe that Alvarez guy who we've mentioned a couple times, discovered like the impact crater from the impact that may or may not have killed the dinosaurs.
And even then, with both of those, like they are,
A layperson would not know that.
I speaking as a layperson, like it is big in the field of geology, but
Right.
it would make Stephen Hawking or like a Carl Sagan or an Einstein, if we're going back to I believe the 50s or so, what kind of makes them separate is that they were known to the general public, and at this point, if I'm trying to think of scientists known to the general public, I've got like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, and I, I mean, I think I run out of steam there.
Yeah, that's really the only other ones that I could think of, because I was thinking, maybe Watson and Crick, the people that sort of discovered DNA, but at least Crick is
Are they
dead.
still alive?
Crick died
Okay.
in 2004. I don't.
Those are ones that would probably make the headlines, even if like people didn't quite know them. They were. I think that's big enough to make headlines.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean that's we're at that we're straining for number 3 and 4, which I think kind
Right.
of proves the point of just how important Stephen Hawking was.
And Watson is
And
still alive, by the way.
that's nuts. That's
He
amazing.
is 92.
You ever you ever think about how like all the big advances that took place in the 20th century that we just now take as facts,
Yeah, no,
or
there's.
we just kind of take as granted, like and those people are still alive, like in like not even just in science, but
Oh,
just
yeah.
like whether you're talking about like Chuck Berry in rock and roll who died a couple of years ago, or like all the foundational laws and rights like your Miranda rights, those are like 50, 60 years old. And then all the scientific advancements, like all those people did that were alive when most of the people that were listening to this
Mm.
podcast were alive. And that's when I stop and think about that sometimes, it truly blows my mind just how recent everything is.
I actually just thought of probably the one that's going to like rock people when he dies is Buzz Aldrin.
Oh goodness, wow.
Because most people don't think of him as like a scientist,
I certainly, yeah.
but yeah, he is like incredibly massive achievements. But yeah, he's currently 91.
I will try and
So
if I can remember, I'll put this in our show notes. But there's a wonderful video of somebody who was questioning Buzz Aldrin on whether or not like he actually went to the moon, some like moon conspiracy guy, and Buzz Aldrin punches him in the face.
oh,
It
excellent.
is it is everything you would want it to be.
Disclaimer: we do not advocate for violence on the podcast, but
Unless you're Buzz Aldrin. If you're Buzz Aldrin, you do whatever you
you can do
want.
whatever you want. Your name, your that.
Right. If you walk on the moon, you get a free pass for life.
But also, could you just imagine having the name Buzz
Buzz Aldrin.
Aldrin? I'm pretty sure Neil Armstrong still alive too?
No, he died a couple years ago, actually. Yeah, Neil Armstrong's been dead
That is true.
for probably 5 or 6 years now.
2012. Almost 10 years.
2012. Gee, wow, even longer than I thought.
Anywho, we should probably actually get into the podcast.
We should. And if I sound different today, just for the record, we're recording this a touch earlier than normal, which means I don't have access to my typical microphone. So if I sound different, or you can hear my girlfriend's brother shouting in the distance, that is because he is doing very well or very poorly in a video game, and I don't have my normal setup here. So with that
Understandable.
disclaimer out of the way, of course, with that disclaimer out of the way, I have been told that we don't have any notes for this episode,
No, we
and
do not.
the one question that I asked ahead of time, I was like, "Oh, Gavin, what does this mean?" He said, "We'll find out during the episode." So, with all of that out of the way, Gavin, hit me with your best shot here. What are we talking about today?
So, we sort of joked about this a little bit last episode, as sort of like a shameless plug to my blog. But the first article,
By the way, Gavin, what is the website of your blog?
deepdigs.net. Thank you for asking, Mike.
Deepdigs.net. 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 Anyways, carry on.
Yeah. So, the first article that I posted on there was about a really fascinating dinosaur specimen, and how we've talked before, Mike, that I'm not the biggest fan of like dinosaur research.
We've made that clear.
But this is stop. This was a really interesting specimen in that it preserved a very particular piece of anatomy that we had not ever had preserved before in a dinosaur. And as Mike sort of alluded to, that would be its cloaca, or as most people would call it, its butt.
So we're talking about butts today.
We are. And this is a science podcast. We are going to be talking about particular parts of anatomy. It is.
I make a pledge to both you and the listeners that I got my one single laugh out early, and
Good.
we'll keep it clean and what's the term here? I don't know. I will keep it clean from here on out during the podcast, even though on the inside I will be making my own jokes.
Understood. So, first we'll talk about this piece of science news because that's really what it is. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll sort of talk about cloaca, or cloacae is the proper plural, in general. So, if you would like to know more, you can head over to deepdigs.net and read some of my work. So, back in, what year was it? They found this specimen quite a while ago, but the actual research on this was published in like the first 2 weeks or so of 2021. And they were actually studying the specimen for something else because generally, as you probably know but have never really thought about, it's pretty much always just bone when you find a fossil. You don't typically get the other bits.
I kind of thought that was all you would ever get.
It is very rare that you do, but it does happen. It usually happens when, a dinosaur falls into a swamp or something similar to that and dies.
Mm-hmm.
But God, I'm gonna keep just subtly laughing myself anytime I say "but."
Oh, so now you get to do that.
Okay, okay, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. You know what?
Okay, yeah, fine. All right. As long as we're both on the same page, yeah, you do. Fine. Yes, you do.
Yeah, so they're actually studying the specimen for its skin because they actually could see pigments in its skin and sort of tell what color this dinosaur was, which is what they were mainly studying it for. And then,
really,
more or less, like it's not the entire dinosaur; it's really just the closer portion of the tail and part of the back, I believe.
Okay.
So it's not the whole specimen, but it's like we can pretty much tell kind of what color this thing was, which is in and of itself so incredibly cool.
Right.
And then as they were doing this, the researchers were like, "Wait, is that what I think it is?" And it turns out, yes, this was a dinosaur cloaca. Not only was it a dinosaur cloaca, it was the first one that we have ever found. And so,
what were the circumstances? So why was it we were able to actually get a dinosaur cloaca in this particular specimen? Was there anything specific in how it was in this particular dinosaur, or the way that this one fossilized? Like, how did we get this?
it is purely the fossilization. It probably comes down
Okay.
a bit to that this is a relatively small dinosaur. So this is a dinosaur called Psittacosaurus. It is in the same larger group of dinosaurs as like Triceratops.
Mm-hmm.
Not all that closely related, but that's probably its closest relative that most people would recognize.
Right.
But it was, medium doggish sized. So as dinosaurs go, pretty small. But yeah, they just happened to have it really well preserved. I don't know even off the top of my head where this specimen was found. Psittacosaurus, off the top of my head, is pretty much exclusively found in China and Mongolia. So I'm assuming it was found somewhere over there. But it was on display in a museum in Germany. So like, I don't know if the people at that museum just were like, didn't notice it, which raises a lot of immediate questions to me.
I mean, even to me as well. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, let me find the actual statement from the lead publisher on this paper. It says, I noticed the cloaca several years ago after we had reconstructed the color patterns of this dinosaur using a remarkable fossil on display at the Senckenberg Museum in Germany, which clearly preserves its skin and color patterns. So they were studying it for that other thing, but it was, at this museum, and nobody had been like, hey, somebody should take a look at that. But before we go any further, we will circle back to this interesting dinosaur butt story. But first, we should probably talk about what is a cloaca.
I thought we made that clear, but go on.
Well, because it's not just a butt.
Oh.
It is not just a butt. So, cloacae, the plural, is they are an all-purpose orifice used for basically anything that happens at that section of the body.
Okay.
So it is used for reproduction. It is used for excretion of nitrogenous waste or peeing. Not all animals pee, like a liquid. So elimination of nitrogenous waste is the technical term for that. And then elimination of solid waste or poop. So a cloaca does all of those. And you might
I
be...
was gonna ask if it comes out does it come out all at once, like
Oh,
is it
no.
pee poo mix, or is it two separate
Well, it
things?
depends.
Okay.
For example, like birds. Birds are, very famous for pooping because they poop all the time.
Yes.
Which is actually just specialized adaptation, because if they sort of, hold it in, that makes them ever so slightly heavier, which makes their flying less efficient, which is why birds poop so often.
Nature's amazing. Oh my god.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same.
That makes so much sense.
It's the same reason why birds don't have teeth. Teeth are heavy. I mean, that's one of the reasons. It's also that birds just have a really high metabolism as well. So they need to eat a lot more than other reptiles, because, as we've thoroughly talked about, birds are reptiles. They need to eat much more than other reptiles, and just in general, if you eat more, you poop more.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so cloacae are found in basically every vertebrate. When we get into invertebrates, stuff gets really weird. I don't know all that much about invertebrate reproduction. But in vertebrates, so your fish, your sharks, your amphibians, reptiles, including birds, and mammals. Almost all of them, aside from placental mammals, and even in that there are some exceptions, they all have cloacae. And it's actually weird. There are some fish that actually don't. So fish had it, and then some of them separated the tubes, which is weird, even though salamanders don't. So in that way, fish are more quote unquote derived or more advanced in that sense, if you want to think about it that way, than amphibians, which is kind of a backwards thing, but still interesting.
Right. Still cool, yeah. So
the biggest thing that I always get asked whenever I try to explain this particular piece of anatomy to people is how does it work? They were like, I feel like that'd be really messy.
I mean, yeah.
And I'm like, well, number one, they're animals. They care less about mess than humans do. Number two, it basically functions the same way that you eating and breathing through the same hole works. There's just a flap that covers the ones you're not using at the time.
Simple yet elegant.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much how it works. It's just the same opening. It is not the same tubes.
So there's one opening and then multiple different kind of it's a fork in the road, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So we'll go over, like I said, just quickly some of the surprising animals that you might not think have one. So as we've talked about, all birds do. Within fish, so sharks and rays, and lobe-finned fishes, which include things like coelacanths, lungfish, and also a couple odd freshwater fish. Those are the only ones that have a true cloaca. in lampreys, which are many people consider like the most primitive vertebrates that we still have around today, and
Hmm.
ray-finned fish, which are what most people think of as fish, uh, things like perch, bass, things like that. Uh, Part of the cloaca remains when they're an adult, and that is for urination and reproduction. But they have a separate poop hole, so they just separated that one tube.
Okay.
And then in chimeras, which are related to sharks but not quite, sharks are slightly different. And then also most teleosts. Okay, so I was actually a little mistaken. Um, Teleosts are the most common group of fish. So uh, there are some ray-finned fishes which are still in that same group. Teleosts are like a smaller group of ray-finned fish,
Hmm.
but teleosts are the largest group. What most of what you think of as a fish. They have three separate openings, just like humans do. Well, at least
Yeah.
female
Well.
humans do. Um, and they have separate tubes, which is weird considering when you look at amphibians, all of them that are still around today just have the one opening.
Hmm. So this is like significantly more common than you might think
This is way more
when you first
common.
hear it.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. This is would you say this is the dominant way this is done, for lack of a better term off the top of my head?
I would say this is the default
Default. Okay,
way that this is
that's
done.
a good way to put it.
Um, it could be sort of a convergent thing, just because looking at the groups that of fish that have the all in one hole. Lobe finned fishes do, and those are what tetrapods, land based, four limbed vertebrates have as
Hmm.
as a default. So it could have been that both sharks and lobe finned fish evolved it separately,
Okay.
or it could be that their common ancestor had it. I think that's probably the general thinking, but I really, really doubt that we have a specimen to show that for sure. So
Right.
that's really just speculation. I don't actually know. Um, and then a lot of other people sort of think, okay, well, if it's an all-in-one whole, like how does reproduction work? And then you kind of think, well, basically no animals besides mammals reproduce the way that mammals do. They have most of them have external fertilization. So like
Hmm.
fish just kind of spray
Right.
eggs
Right.
and
Isn't it
sperm together, and then they just like Finding Nemo. You see the little eggs.
right? You took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, they're all it all happens outside, which seems way less painful.
Oh, Mike.
I mean, am I wrong?
No,
Like,
you
do
are
fish?
absolutely correct.
Okay.
And so as we sort of move up in quotes the vertebrate tree, we go to amphibians, and uh, like I said, amphibians, all of them that I'm aware of, have a cloaca and not separated tubes. And in fact, frogs reproduce pretty much like fish. The female lays eggs, and the male just kind of hops over to them and fertilizes them. A lot of
Hmm.
salamanders, what they do is the male will uh, lay a like sperm packet,
Hmm.
and the female will come and like suck that up. So it's like it technically is internal fertilization, but not through direct action of the male.
Right. That it's a completely both participants don't need to be present at the same time.
I mean, they typically are. There's usually like the a little bit of like a mating sort of type ritual thing.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so that's
Okay.
that's how salamanders are weird in a lot of ways. Um, and then moving up to reptiles, I believe all reptiles have it. I don't believe I don't know of any. I wouldn't say that there are none, but I don't know of any reptiles that don't have a cloaca, that where all
Okay.
three things are done from the same hole. Although there are some that do something else really crazy with their cloaca, mostly turtles.
Okay. Tell
Turtles
me more.
are really well known for being able to hold their breath for a really long time, right?
I didn't know that, but now I
Well, I mean,
do.
they stay underwater for a long time.
It's one of those things that makes total sense. I just never
Okay.
thought about it that way.
Many turtles, especially sea turtles, but also like snapping turtles can do it too, can actually exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide through the water with their cloaca. They can breathe through their butt.
And is that so? Can they all? I apologize for this being might be like the dumbest question, but so they can breathe through their butt and their mouth,
Yes.
so that it
It does not, so their cloaca does not connect to their lungs.
okay.
In,
Is it just to the bloodstream?
yes, instead, it works basically just like gills. There are a bunch of like little filaments on their cloaca that have just a lot of blood very close to like the surface of the tissue.
Mm-hmm.
And just because there's very little of a boundary there, oxygen and carbon dioxide can just sort of exchange through that. It is not nearly as efficient as their lungs, but it's what lets sea turtles stay underwater for like hours at a time.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
So that's my favorite thing about cloacas is just that turtles use it to breathe casually.
We're at like 4 or 5 of my favorite things that I've learned today in the 20 some odd minutes we've already been recording. All right, keep going. Keep telling me new stuff.
So then we get to mammals, and uh, there are three, as we talked about, three main groups of mammals. There are monotremes, the egg-laying ones, marsupials, and then placental mammals. So monotremes, the four species of them that we have, they all have a true cloaca, which makes sense because they lay eggs. Marsupials
Mm-hmm.
are weird in many ways, but regarding their cloaca, some of them have a cloaca, some of them don't. Um,
Okay.
so, for example, marsupial moles do have one. That is a specific group that I believe is only native to Australia. Um, yes, they are only native to Australia, and that's kind of interesting. I think they are the only. Some of them have it as juveniles, which is also weird to me. And then they sort of split as they get older.
Oh,
um,
really?
so let me read it uh, directly from a Wikipedia page. Let's see. Yes, it's very official. I know. In marsupials, the genital tract is separate from the anus, but a trace of the original cloaca does remain externally. So it's
Hmm.
like they kind of do, but
Hmm.
kind of don't.
Yeah, that almost raises more questions, but okay.
Yeah. And then with those marsupial moles, some people kind of argue it's like, are they marsupials, or are they like monotremes that just don't lay eggs? So even today, with species that are still around, we don't always know where they kind of fall in relation to other species, which I kind of love.
That is cool how, you think there are these hard lines for, what goes into what category, and anytime you start drawing hard lines, you're going to find an edge case.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when we get to placental mammals, such as you, me, your dog, your cat, uh,
The good stuff.
that's true. Marsupials are pretty bad, with the exception of opossums. I do love opossums. Um, most asterisk adult placental mammals do not have any remaining trace of a cloaca, although you did have one at one point
Oh, did I?
when you were developing inside your mom. You did have an embryonic cloaca.
So, okay, and I assume that this was early on and it eventually evolved into, the other junk.
No, I mean this is like not evolution. This is just like when you first
No,
form
that's what I
as
mean.
like
Like,
as an embryo. Yeah, but then it does eventually
right,
divide. There are some
right.
medical conditions where it does not though.
Oh, okay.
Yes. They are called persistent cloaca and Cyanomelia, also called mermaid syndrome, which is a really horrible name for it, but we're gonna move on.
I have actually. I remember watching, like when I was younger. I used to watch the TV show Medical Incredible,
Oh,
and
okay.
every now and again, I saw something on that on there, and it was like it's one of those things that sounds cool until you realize any of the possible implications of it.
Yeah, because it's like if you're not supposed to have it all be one orifice, that's bad.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
yeah, there are many medical problems that I'm sure are associated with that, none of which are good. Um, but yeah, so in almost all placental mammals, separate tubes. However, in tenrecs and golden moles, which are native to Africa. In fact, I think tenrecs are actually. Oh no, I'm thinking of a different group. So they are both in the order Soricida,
Hmm.
which are basically just African moles, but not really related to the moles that we have in North America. Um, they have cloacae as well as some shrews. Not all of them, just some of them.
Hmm.
So that tells me that somewhere in their evolution, they had separate orifices and then evolved to recombine them back into one for some reason.
That seems incredibly odd, especially like when you said that the default was to just have the singular cloaca. Like they, evolved otherwise and then, devolved back into just having the cloaca. Like
Mm-hmm.
that seems incredibly strange that it would kind of go back and forth that way.
So sometimes things like that do happen. Um,
Okay.
yeah, there can be reversals like that. I have no idea what like the selective pressure for that would be. So for like in like evolution, if something happens, there's usually a selective pressure that like makes that adaptation better for some
Hmm.
reason.
Okay.
And that's sort of what natural selection, what is selected for, because it gives you a slight advantage over ones without that adaptation. So somewhere along the lines, either it was probably a mutation that similar to like those medical conditions in humans. Uh, Somewhere along the lines, one was born with a cloaca instead of the separate orifices, and that one didn't die. So it had babies with that mutation and so on and so forth until that's just a thing of the species.
Right.
Um, and the reason why I say it is just much more likely that these three groups uh, did it individually themselves, as opposed to they kept it from like the very early mammals, and every other group of mammals switched. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
If it was like a really basal or like primitive group of placental mammals, that'd be one thing. But these are not all that primitive, if I'm remembering my mammalian taxonomy correctly. Um,
I'm sure you are.
with a lot of the smaller ones, I don't really know all that well. Like a lot of like the mole and rodent like animals, my taxonomy is not all that great. Um, but especially like the African ones, they seem rather primitive. But the shrews definitely surprised me. But anyway, this is me rambling. Let's go back to what people want to talk about, which is dinosaurs.
All right, let's bring it all back. So we've gone through the animal kingdom here, and we have gone back to every 4-year-old's favorite, the dinosaurs.
So the big question on everyone's mind when they sort of announced or realized, hey, is this the first dinosaur cloaca that we're aware of? Was
I apologize for interrupting. Can I ask one quick question
yeah.
as we're talking about this? So, was it hypothesized, was it expected that dinosaurs had a cloaca before this discovery, or did this kind of change our understanding of dinosaurs?
I mean, obviously we didn't know for sure, but we kind of assumed just because, birds do, and
Hmm.
also their closest relatives that are still alive, crocodilians, do.
Okay.
So it's like, in a lot of ways, dinosaurs are more like birds than like crocodiles, but in a lot of ways, they're sort of like an intermediary between the two, which will come up in a bit. But we had assumed, but until you find one, you don't know.
It would be more surprising if we found it the other way, but the fact that it was still discovered is significant.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so everyone with dinosaurs sort of being sort of, I don't quite like using this terminology, but sort of being like an intermediary between birds and crocodilians. People were like, well, is their cloaca more like birds or more like a crocodilian's? And
And
it was really interesting because I'll read another direct quote from sort of the press release that they did for this paper. So this is a quote from, is it the same scientist? Yes, it is the same scientist that we quoted earlier. So they said, it took a long while before we got around to finishing it off, to finish it off, because no one has ever cared about comparing the exterior of cloacal openings of living animals. So it was largely uncharted territory. Which, I mean, I guess.
I,
um, and so none of the internal features of the cloaca was preserved, just the outside, which is why they
okay.
specify the exterior of cloacal openings. Um,
Okay.
and then the second author on the paper added, indeed, they are pretty nondescript. We found that the vent, another word for cloaca, does look different in many groups of tetrapods, but they sort of suggested that it looks more like a cloaca of a crocodilian than it does of a bird, which is interesting.
Was there any reason they thought that?
I mean, just comparisons. They also appears to be, it's hard to tell without any of like the actual like tissue, but there appeared to be what might be scent glands near it, which,
Scent glands?
yes, which birds do not have, but crocodilians do.
Would you so okay, I've got like two different ideas of what this might be. What do scent glands do?
Produce scents.
Okay. It was one of two things
No,
in my
they
head and
do
I
not
wanted to make
they
sure
do
it was
not
that.
smell through their butt. Some reptiles breathe
You
through their
know,
butt, but they do not smell through their butt.
I'm glad you were able to read my mind on that one. Okay.
Yes,
Moving on.
they produce scents, like pheromones and things like that. Um, and because like I said a while ago, they said they were looking at this originally for the pigments in the skin, and they were like, well, is this what do the pigments look like on the butt? And it is a not significantly, but it is sort of a different color on the gland. So it's possible they think that it was using like the scent from the glands and also like the color. Maybe they could like flush it with blood to make it change colors, um, to communicate between each other, similar to like baboons or I know like mandrills are like the primates known for having like the really bright, colorful butts. So,
Okay.
well, I mean, like Rafiki.
Sure.
But yeah, they will commonly sort of signal to each other with their butt. And it's a really interesting piece of behavior, which is behavior things in paleontology are really hard to come by just because,
Hmm.
like, there's only so much you can get from bones, you know.
Right.
But this was a really interesting sort of development that they were like, this is the first real, concrete evidence for any kind of behavior, at least in this dinosaur.
Right.
Let's see. Some modern crocodilians don't signal like that with their butt, which makes sense just looking at a crocodilian. Um, but a
Right.
lot of birds do. Birds are really really famous for their like interspecies like behavior, with one another. So especially for things like mating. So this could have been that, who knows, Psittacosaurus might have done some kind of mating dance type thing, as we see in many
Hmm.
birds using its cloaca. And Psittacosaurus also does have some feather-like quills along its tail. So, um, but unfortunately, they couldn't tell whether this individual was a male or a female, which would help a lot. You know,
How would you go about doing that with a dinosaur?
you would need to be able to see some of the tubes and stuff on the inside.
So are we able to determine, have we ever been able to determine whether dinosaurs are male or female?
Yes. So in some, it's just size comparisons.
Mm-hmm.
For
Okay.
example, in most reptiles, not all of them, but most, females are larger.
Really? Okay.
Lizards generally know a lot of, in almost every species of snake that I can think of. I don't know of a case where the males are larger. Either they're equal or the female is substantially larger.
Understood.
Which is a similar case in many invertebrates because, like, frankly, sperm are cheap. You don't need to be that large to be able to produce sperm,
Fair.
but to produce and actually take care of and make sure your eggs hatch, you want to be relatively big so you can invest resources in eggs instead of yourself. You know what I mean?
That makes total sense. Yeah, exactly. That makes total sense.
So we actually know for a fact that Sue, the I don't believe it is anymore, but for a very long time was the most complete T-Rex skeleton that we've had. Um, we can tell that Sue is a female because she's huge, even for a T-Rex, and also just very robust compared to some other T-Rex specimens that we've had. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for some species, you can tell with things about their pelvis, and that it's just shaped in a certain way that would better allow eggs to be laid. Whereas, obviously a male wouldn't need a pelvis quite like that. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting that I don't believe we could tell with this individual. I don't think that there's too many skeletal features in this dinosaur in general that can tell whether it's a male or female. But that would really help. Um, Sort of if we had a comparison of like a male's cloaca and a female's cloaca, you would probably expect that the males would be more pigmented, just because in birds, think of like a cardinal, where like the males are bright red, and the females are kind of like a
Right.
duller, drab brownish type color with a little bit of red.
Mm-hmm.
So you would probably expect the males to be more pigmented, uh, like that as well. But again, no way to really know that. So
Right. All just kind of inferring based on, what we know today.
yeah, but this sort of does lend some credence to the idea that dinosaurs are sort of intermediary between dinosaurs and birds, where it's like the anatomy itself was more crocodilian with the scent glands and also just sort of the structure of the cloaca,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the behavior side of things might have been much more bird-like, which I think is really neat, you know.
Right.
And then they also worked with a paleo artist, which is actually like a really uh, important, part of paleontology. Granted, they take a lot of artistic liberties. Uh,
I was gonna say, so I've been looking at your website for most of this episode.
mhm.
Is this where we get the this picture at the top of this particular article?
Yes, it is. Um, so if you go on the website, I mean, everything is, all the places where you can find this artist are right on there. But this picture that's on the website was released with the article by this artist named Robert Nichols. And uh, granted, in almost every type of dinosaur, we don't know what color they were. That's pretty rare that we do. Uh, we're getting better at that, where it's like now we kind of only need a little bit of skin. And we can do some chemical analysis and some optical analysis uh, to sort of get a better picture of what color they were. But
That's still wild.
oh yeah, and it's actually really interesting. This is not at all. Well, I guess it's tangentially related to cloacae, but I actually heard some news about us figuring out potentially what color some dinosaur eggs were, which is
Weren't they just egg colored?
you would think, but think about a lot of birds. Like robins have these baby blue, like sky blue colored eggs.
You just keep this. You know what? For an episode with no notes, you just keep absolutely blow. Wow. Okay.
So the idea is that many reptiles that lay eggs, because not all of them do, but they have just
Hmm.
sort of an eggshell colored egg. Who would have guessed? But
Yeah. Well.
they that sort of implies that they're buried, because why would you need to invest any kind of pigment in an egg if it's going to be hidden to begin with? Whereas a lot of birds, because some birds also do, um, make burrows and things like that. Uh, but they looked at the egg colors between birds that do burrow and birds that do not,
Hmm.
and there was a really clear difference in that things like robins that do not, have different colored eggs, or even some that aren't necessarily like bright colored like a robin's egg might have like speckles on it to make it look like it's just dirt, you know. Whereas ones that do burrow were just typical, no patterns on them at all.
Okay.
But pigments, are the color that they are because their chemical structure is very particular. So when you see something, that is it absorbing every color except the one that you see, because that's what's reflected off of that surface.
Hmm. Okay.
So yeah, so it's like if you see something that's green, it is absorbing every other color and reflecting the green wavelength of light back at you, and that's what you see.
Okay. This actually, now that I'm thinking more about this, I do remember this from like my eighth grade art class.
Oh, so yeah, I was thinking more biology with like chlorophyll. So like
Maybe that
there's
too.
different kinds of chlorophyll that plants use, which is why leaves turn like red or orange or yellow in the fall, because they're changing the kind of chlorophyll that they use.
Right.
Chlorophyll A, which is the normal one that you see as green, absorbs the red and orange and yellow wavelengths,
Hmm.
because those are what's stronger in like the summer. And then when they switch to their fall colors, the green wavelengths are stronger in the fall, so it wants to absorb them, and it reflects the red or orange or yellow that you see.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, but yeah, so they looked at like the structure of some of these pigments in these dinosaur eggs and found that some of them were colored. Maybe not bright blue like that, but they were not the typical eggshell color.
Right. They were the different than the default that I would think of.
Right. So that implies that they had above ground nests, which like seems kind of obvious, but again, it's just putting together more pieces that we didn't have before.
Right.
But yeah, so that's pretty much all I got for dinosaur cloacae.
And I once again, I pointed this out, I think two or three times already this episode, but for an episode without no, like this was just just kind of you riffing, and I shouldn't say riffing because you did read a whole article on it, which I'll make sure that we link in the show notes for this episode, but just all the different, things that come with this. The fact that, there was a dinosaur found with a butthole, semi intact, like it is it is wild, all the stuff that goes with it and all the other things that need to go with that to try and get a basic understanding of it. It really is kind of amazing just how much goes into every little thing, the whole we stand on the shoulders of giants thing. Every little discovery comes with 1,000 other things that will come before and after it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it really just goes to show like the whole fossilization process, how so incredibly rare getting anything to be preserved as a fossil to begin with is like one in a million. Like having something like this is like one in a billion, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, it was always my understanding that you got bones and that was it. And the fact that like it is even possible to get more than bone is wild to me.
Most of the skin stuff that we do have from dinosaurs is from skin impressions. So it's like the dinosaur dies and falls in some mud, and its skin
Hmm.
leaves essentially like a skin version of a footprint. So
Right.
it's like we know for quite a few dinosaurs, not all of them, obviously, but for many dinosaurs, we know like roughly what their scale pattern was, and why we know that dinosaurs had sort of the more lumpy type scales, uh, relative to like what you think of with like bird feet, how they're sort of like overlapping. Dinosaurs didn't really have
Hmm.
that, and we actually know that from skin impressions. So there's many things that we do know about dinosaurs, but this also just goes to show how many things we just don't. There are many things that we infer, but until you get a 1 in a billion specimen like this, uh, that so many things can be learned from this. And I'm positive that more studies are going to be done on this specimen. And if they do, you'll hear about them first here.
I sure hope so, and I sure hope that we continue doing this, and that is kind of a good reminder that why the good science is needed. To learn, there is still quite a bit more to be learned, even if you might think there's, what is there left to learn about dinosaurs? Well, buttholes,
Even,
buttholes, and
oh, go ahead.
no, it was just buttholes and everything else.
Well, even just how many things that like we currently have in museums that we just don't know. And again, like it blows my mind that this has been in the museum. I think they said in the press release exactly how long, or roughly how long this had been with the museum. I didn't put it in my article that I wrote, but like,
Hmm.
it's not like they had just found it. This wasn't
Right.
like a new specimen. It was a specimen that had been there. And so just think about how many, for example, like the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, they've got thousands and thousands, probably closer to millions of specimens. How many of those might have something maybe not quite as obvious as this, but definitely something potentially as important as this that, just kind of gets lost in the crowd?
It's hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. So I don't know.
None of us know until somebody does the work, and I think that is a wonderful place to leave off here. So, Gavin, thank you very much for this episode. I know you've got a fun week planned coming up, and I hope that you have a wonderful time going to explore a few national parks. This has been episode number 13 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. We did an episode about buttholes, everybody. You can't say you don't come here for the entertainment.
Oh my god.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you to the listeners. We will see you next week.